Lois Riess. There are certain images seared into the American consciousness. The neighborly face across the fence, the doting grandmother at her grandchild's basketball game, the pleasant woman making small talk at the local bowling alley. These faces represent safety, stability, normalcy. But sometimes, behind that friendly smile and those familiar routines, there exists something so profoundly disconnected from human empathy that when it finally surfaces, it forces us to question whether we truly know anyone at all. The story of Lois Riess is not simply about murder. It is about the terrifying reality that someone who appears utterly ordinary can harbor impulses so dark that they will kill twice, flee across state lines, and continue smiling at strangers even as law enforcement closes in from every direction. In the tight-knit community of Blooming Prairie, Minnesota, a town of fewer than 2,000 souls where neighbors knew each other by name, 56-year-old Lois Riess seemed to embody Midwestern wholesomeness. She worked at a daycare. She had 3 adult children and 5 grandchildren. She participated in a bowling league. People remembered her for her cooking and her generosity with gifts. But beneath this veneer of community involvement and maternal warmth, Lois had developed a compulsion that would eventually destroy everything. She was addicted to gambling, losing staggering sums at slot machines and casinos across the region. On March 11, 2018, that addiction intersected with marital conflict in a way that ended with violence. After an argument with her husband, David, a 54-year-old worm farmer who ran Prairie Wax Worm Farm, Lois later claimed he handed her a loaded .22 caliber handgun and told her to kill herself, telling her to get it right this time, referencing previous suicide attempts. Instead of turning the weapon on herself, Lois looked at her husband of 35 years, aimed for his heart, and pulled the trigger twice. She then laid down beside his body, closed his eyes, and covered him with a blanket. David's remains would not be discovered for nearly 2 weeks, during which time Lois had already embarked on a journey that would end with another person dead and a nationwide manhunt. Before leaving Minnesota, Lois forged David's signature on checks and transferred $11,000 from his business account into her own. She took the couple's Cadillac Escalade and disappeared. When concerned employees at the worm farm reported that neither David nor Lois had been seen for days, police conducted a welfare check on March 23, 2018. They found David's decaying body in a bathroom at their home. Lois was nowhere to be found. Authorities determined the death was a homicide caused by multiple gunshot wounds, and the search for Lois began. What followed was a cross-country spree that demonstrated just how dangerous a desperate woman with nothing left to lose could become. Lois drove to Fort Myers Beach, Florida, where she was captured on surveillance video at Smoke and Oyster Brewery on April 5, 2018. There, she struck up a conversation with 59-year-old Pamela Hutchinson, a woman who was in Florida to help scatter a late relative's ashes. The reason Lois approached this particular woman was chilling. Pamela bore a striking physical resemblance to Lois herself. Over the next few days, Lois befriended Pamela, sharing meals and conversation, all while planning to murder her and steal her identity to avoid capture. Lois shot Pamela in her rental condo, leaving her body in a bathroom, just as she had done with David. She took Pamela's identification, credit cards, and white Acura TL, then drove out of Florida. Maintenance staff would discover Pamela's body a week later while investigating a water-related problem in the building. By then, Lois was using Pamela's identity to withdraw money, stay in hotels, and gamble at casinos across Louisiana and Texas, leaving a trail of surveillance footage that showed her spending a dead woman's money with apparent ease. The manhunt ended on April 19, 2018, at a restaurant called Sea Ranch on South Padre Island, Texas, just 27 miles from the Mexican border. A tip from someone who recognized her from news reports led U.S. Marshals and local law enforcement to the location, where they found Lois sitting alone, having a drink. She was arrested without incident. In December 2019, Lois pleaded guilty to first-degree murder in Florida for killing Pamela Hutchinson, receiving a life sentence without parole. In August 2020, after being extradited back to Minnesota, she pleaded guilty to first-degree murder for killing David, receiving a second life sentence. Due to an agreement between Florida and Minnesota, Lois serves both life sentences concurrently at the Minnesota Women's Correctional Facility in Shakopee. The case of Lois Riess remains deeply disturbing not because of its complexity, but because of its simplicity. A grandmother, someone entrusted with caring for children, chose gambling and freedom over human life not once, but twice. She murdered her husband and then befriended and killed a stranger whose only mistake was looking like her. Today, Lois Riess will never leave prison, and the 5 grandchildren who once knew her as a doting grandmother must now reconcile that memory with the woman who became known nationwide as the killer grandma, Donna Adelson. Wealth and privilege can buy many things: luxury homes, expensive cars, private schools, trips to exotic destinations. But for some, even unlimited resources cannot purchase what they desire most. When a person of means becomes fixated on an obstacle, compromise feels like defeat, and patience feels like weakness. For 75-year-old Donna Adelson, the answer involved hired gunmen, coded conversations, money washed to remove traces, and a murder that would take over a decade to unravel before placing her behind bars for life. The Adelsons were not just wealthy, they were prominent in South Florida society. Donna and her husband Harvey raised their children with every advantage. Their son Charlie became a successful periodontist who drove a Ferrari. Their daughter Wendy earned a law degree and became a clinical law professor. On the surface, the family had achieved the American dream. Beneath it, however, existed a need for control so powerful that when Wendy's marriage to Florida State University law professor Daniel Markel ended in divorce, it set in motion events that revealed the darkest impulses of family loyalty taken to destructive extremes. Daniel Markel was a respected scholar and dedicated father committed to co-parenting his 2 sons after a bitter divorce in 2013. Custody remained 50-50, keeping the children in Tallahassee where Markel taught. Wendy and the Adelson family wanted her and the boys in South Florida, near them. Wendy filed a motion to relocate, which a judge denied. Markel refused to move. The law had spoken, but for the Adelsons, legal limits were obstacles to be overcome. On the 18th of July 2014, Markel returned home from the gym to his Tallahassee house. As he pulled into his garage, 2 men waiting shot him twice in the head. He was 41. The hit had been arranged through an elaborate chain of individuals designed to insulate the Adelson family. The gunmen were Sigfredo Garcia and Luis Rivera, recruited through Catherine Magbanua, who was dating Charlie Adelson. Prosecutors later established that Charlie paid $100,000 for the murder, and he had not acted alone. Phone records, wiretaps, and Magbanua's testimony revealed Donna Adelson's deep involvement from the beginning. During testimony, Magbanua stated that when Charlie discussed the arrangement, he often stepped away to call his mother. On the night of the murder, she collected cash for herself and the gunmen. When she noticed it was damp and moldy, Charlie explained Donna had washed it, an attempt to remove forensic traces. The case took years to build. Rivera accepted a plea deal in 2016 and received 19 years. Garcia and Magbanua were convicted and sentenced to life. Charlie Adelson was arrested in April 2022 and convicted in November 2023, receiving life plus 60 years. Throughout this, Donna remained free, but authorities were closing in. On the 13th of November 2023, Donna Adelson was arrested at Miami International Airport, attempting to board a one-way flight to Vietnam, a country with no U.S. extradition treaty. Her husband Harvey accompanied her. The timing, shortly after her son's conviction, highlighted her consciousness of guilt. Her trial began on the 22nd of August 2025. On September 4, after only 3 hours of deliberation, the jury convicted Donna of first-degree murder, conspiracy, and solicitation. She exclaimed, "Oh," and began shaking and crying. The judge removed the jury and warned her to compose herself. On the 13th of October 2025, she was sentenced to life with an additional 30 years for conspiracy and solicitation. During sentencing, Donna maintained her innocence, stating, "I am an innocent woman convicted of this terrible crime without evidence. I've never gotten a parking ticket, but I'm going to prison for a murder I did not commit." The judge interrupted multiple times, citing her utter lack of remorse. Daniel Markel's mother, Ruth, mourned the loss of her son. The 2 grandsons Daniel loved will grow up knowing their father was murdered, so their grandmother could have them closer to home. Wendy Adelson, who denies involvement and has never been charged, changed the boys' last names from Markel to Adelson and cut off contact with their paternal grandparents. The family that orchestrated murder in the name of togetherness ensured the children would never know the father who fought to remain part of their lives. Today, Donna Adelson serves life without parole, the 5th member of a conspiracy demonstrating that money cannot buy consequences, only delay them. Mia Desiree Harris. Grandmothers occupy a sacred place in the family structure. They are supposed to be the soft landing, the voice of wisdom, the protector who would give anything to keep their grandchildren safe. Society builds entire holidays around the concept of grandmother love, painting images of warm cookies and gentle embraces. We trust them with what we hold most dear, because their bond with our children feels unbreakable, natural, beyond question. This trust runs so deep that when it shatters, when a grandmother becomes the source of violence rather than protection, the betrayal feels like a fundamental violation of nature itself. The case of Mia Desiree Harris represents one of the most disturbing examples of this rupture. A night when paranoia and rage transformed a grandmother into someone capable of pointing a gun at a 6-month-old baby and pulling the trigger. The evening of December 9th, 2023, began like countless others in Liberty Township, Ohio, a quiet suburb about 25 miles north of Cincinnati. Inside an apartment on Dutch View Court, multiple generations of a family were under one roof. Destiny Buffington was there with her infant daughter Myra, just 6 months old. Also present was Myra's paternal grandmother, 43-year-old Mia Desiree Harris. What happened next would tear that family apart and leave a baby fighting for her life. According to court testimony and records, Harris had been behaving erratically in the weeks leading up to that night. Prosecutors would later point to increased substance abuse as the driving factor behind her deteriorating mental state. Harris had been smoking marijuana more frequently, obtaining it from a different dealer, and the drug appeared to trigger severe paranoia. She became convinced that her family was conspiring against her, plotting to take her money and abandon her. In her distorted thinking, she needed to act first. As Detective Daniel Turner would later testify, Harris told authorities that her family had tried to harm her, so she decided to harm them first. In her own words, they had crucified her, so she would crucify them. That night, Harris retrieved a 9mm Ruger handgun. What followed was a scene of absolute terror. Harris chased Destiny Buffington around the apartment with the weapon, calling her a demon and forcing her to plead for her life. When Buffington locked herself and baby Myra in a bedroom, Harris fired multiple shots through the door before breaking it down entirely. Once inside, Harris pointed the gun at Buffington and fired, but missed. Then she turned the weapon towards 6-month-old Myra, who lay on the bed. At point-blank range, Harris shot the infant in the face. The bullet entered through Myra's eye, After the shooting, according to testimony, Harris picked up the wounded baby, smiled, and handed her back to her mother. Then she fled the apartment. Buffington made a frantic 911 call at 1:50 in the morning. When dispatchers answered, all they could hear was a mother's anguish. "My baby's been shot. My baby's been shot," Buffington screamed into the phone. Deputies arriving at the scene found Myra in critical condition with a gunshot wound to the head. She was rushed to UC Westchester Hospital. Meanwhile, other deputies spotted Harris driving the wrong way on Interstate 75. When they attempted to stop her, she refused and led them on a pursuit that ended back at the apartment complex, where she was taken into custody. When detectives asked Harris why she had shot her own granddaughter, her response was chilling in its lack of remorse. "That was not my grandbaby," she told them. "Sorry, not sorry." When asked if she believed she should be punished, Harris replied with a simple, "No." She added, "Fair is fair. You attempted on me, and I beat you at your own game. Checkmate." Harris was charged with multiple counts relating to the attacks on both Myra and Destiny. She initially pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity and underwent 3 separate forensic psychological evaluations. 2 of the 3 experts determined she did not meet the criteria for severe mental illness. Instead, they identified substance abuse as the primary driver of her behavior that night. In September 2024, just 2 weeks before her scheduled trial, Harris accepted a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to 1 count of felonious assault with a 3-year firearms specification in exchange for the dismissal of the remaining charges. On October 29, 2024, Butler County Common Pleas Judge Dan Hauge sentenced Harris to 9 to 12 years in prison. She will be eligible for parole in December 2032. During the sentencing hearing, baby Myra, now 18 months old, was present in the courtroom with her mother. As Destiny Buffington addressed Harris directly, Myra began to cry. "You hear that?" Buffington said, looking at the woman who had shot her daughter. "That is just God, and I know that you know that just as much as me, and I pray for you, and I really pray, because I don't know why you did this." Harris declined to speak at her sentencing. Against all odds, Myra survived, though she faces ongoing physical challenges as a result of her injuries. Her mother now documents Myra's progress on social media, celebrating every milestone achieved by the little girl the family calls their miracle baby. Judge Hauge himself stated that the hand of God was the reason Myra was alive. Today, Mia Desiree Harris sits in an Ohio prison, serving time for shooting her own granddaughter at point-blank range. The case stands as one of the most incomprehensible acts of family violence, a reminder that the people we trust most can sometimes become the greatest threats, and that substance abuse, combined with untreated mental health issues, can transform someone into a danger, even to those they should protect, above all others. Judy Black Widow Buenoano. Some people collect stamps, others collect antiques or rare coins. Judy Buenoano collected something far more sinister: death certificates and insurance checks. Over more than a decade, those around her began dying under circumstances that seemed tragic but were carefully planned. The men in her life developed strange symptoms, wasted away in hospital beds, and died while she played the grieving partner. Each time, she walked away with thousands of dollars, and no one suspected the hard-working single mother trying to survive. But when one intended victim survived not just poison but a car explosion, the pattern could no longer be ignored, and the truth about Florida's most notorious serial killer came to light. Born Judy Welty on the 4th of April 1943 in Quanah, Texas, her childhood was defined by loss and violence. Her mother died when she was 4, and she and her brother Robert went to live with their grandparents. When their father remarried, they moved to Roswell, New Mexico, joining him and his new wife. Judy later claimed her father and stepmother abused and starved her, forcing her to work as their slave. At 14, she spent 2 months in prison for attacking her father, stepmother, and 2 stepbrothers with hot grease. After release, she attended reform school, graduated in 1960, and became a nursing assistant. The following year, she gave birth to an illegitimate son, Michael. In 1962, Judy married Air Force officer James Goodyear, and they moved to Orlando, Florida, raising Michael, whom James adopted, along with their own daughter and son. 3 months after James returned from Vietnam in 1971, he was admitted to the United States Naval Hospital in Orlando with mysterious symptoms. On the 16th of September 1971, James Goodyear died, initially attributed to natural causes. Judy collected benefits from life insurance policies. That same year, her house caught fire, and she collected more insurance money. No one connected the dots. By 1972, Judy had a new boyfriend, Bobby Joe Morris. She moved to Colorado with him, and in 1978, Morris fell ill and died after showing the same mysterious symptoms as Goodyear. Once again, Judy collected insurance money. That year, she legally changed her surname to Buenoano, a corrupted Spanish version of Goodyear, both meaning good year. The pattern continued with her son. Michael Buenoano, whom she had long resented, became severely ill with symptoms including paraplegia. On the 13th of May 1980, Judy took Michael out in a canoe in Milton, Florida. The canoe rolled, and Michael, weighed down by braces and wearing no life jacket, drowned. Investigators later concluded arsenic crippled the child, and Judy pushed him out. She used the insurance money to open a beauty salon in Gulf Breeze. After Michael's death, Buenoano began dating John Gentry. She persuaded him to take out life insurance policies on each other, later increasing his to $500,000. A month later, Gentry caught a cold, and Buenoano gave him vitamin C capsules. Experiencing extreme nausea and vomiting, he checked into a hospital. He recovered, only to have his car explode in Pensacola in 1983 while inside. He survived, and police began investigating. A search of Judy's home revealed wire and tape matching the bomb in Gentry's car. Authorities found the vitamin pills contained arsenic and paraformaldehyde. This led to exhumations of Goodyear, Morris, and Michael. All had been given arsenic. Goodyear and Morris were confirmed to have died of arsenic poisoning. When Goodyear's crypt was opened, it emitted a visible cloud and strange odor. In 1984, Buenoano was convicted for the murder of Michael and attempted murder of Gentry. She received a 12-year sentence for Gentry and life for Michael. Later, she was tried and convicted for the murder of James Goodyear, receiving the death sentence. Pensacola prosecutor Russell Edgar gave her the nickname that would define her legacy, comparing her to a black widow spider that feeds off her mates and young. Buenoano spent 13 years on death row, maintaining her innocence. On the 30th of March 1998, 5 days before her 55th birthday, she was executed in the electric chair at Florida State Prison. Her last meal consisted of steamed broccoli, asparagus, strawberries, tomato wedges, and hot tea with lemon. When asked if she had last words, she said, "No, sir." She was the first woman executed in Florida since a slave named Celia in 1848. An investigator noted she was the coldest person he had ever met, paralyzed by fear and carried in by guards. Over her spree, prosecutors estimated she collected approximately $240,000 from her victims. The woman who survived a childhood defined by abuse became an adult who inflicted death for profit, targeting those closest to her with patience and precision. Today, Judy Buenoano's case stands as a chilling reminder that sometimes the greatest danger comes not from strangers, but from those across the dinner table. Patricia Ricks, Children enter foster care every day in America, pulled from homes where their parents cannot or will not care for them. They carry small bags and the weight of abandonment. Sometimes, a grandparent steps forward, taking these children in despite age, limited resources, and exhaustion. When this happens, we celebrate it. We call it redemption, family stepping up, a child saved. But salvation is not guaranteed, and rescue can turn dark when stress, frustration, and lack of support push a caretaker past the breaking point. What happened in a modest home on Dutchman Road in Nashville, North Carolina, proves that the hands meant to protect can become instruments of destruction. Patricia Ricks was 71 when she took in her 5 grandchildren, aged 3 to 15. Their parents did not want them. Ricks, already in her twilight years, became their legal guardian. Church members praised her sacrifice. Family called her a wonderful mother and grandmother. Teachers at Cooper's Elementary School knew Crystal Lane, the 8-year-old granddaughter, as one of Ricks's charges. But they also saw something else. Crystal arrived at school with injuries so severe she was nearly unrecognizable. Staff watched as the girl said she had been beaten for refusing to put lotion on her skin. Reports were made to Nash County Department of Social Services, and caseworkers were assigned. Yet Crystal and her siblings remained in their grandmother's custody. On the 7th of February 2023, shortly after 4 in the afternoon, Nash County Sheriff's Office received word that a child had been brought to Nash UNC Healthcare with severe injuries. The child was already deceased upon arrival. Deputies and detectives responded and launched an investigation. Authorities discovered 8-year-old Crystal had been beaten so severely that she died from her injuries. She had blunt force trauma throughout her body and head, injuries so extensive that there was no chance to save her. Court testimony and arrest warrants revealed Ricks had beaten Crystal primarily with a plunger. One of the children called 911, reporting that Ricks was driving Crystal to the hospital. By the time medical personnel arrived, it was too late. Patricia Ricks, then 72, was arrested that evening and charged with first-degree murder and felony child abuse with serious injury. She was booked into the Nash County Detention Center without bond. When questioned, Ricks did not speak. The surviving siblings were immediately removed and placed in the custody of social services. Nearly 2 years later, on the 31st of January 2025, Ricks appeared in court in a wheelchair. At 74, she faced serious medical problems. Her defense noted she likely would have died if the case had gone to trial. Visibly emotional, she entered an Alford plea to first-degree murder, a guilty plea, allowing defendants to maintain innocence while acknowledging the state's case was strong enough for conviction. Multiple times, the judge asked Ricks if she understood her plea. She broke down repeatedly. Her attorney, Phil Lane, explained it was emotionally troubling because it involved the death of a child and grandchild. Ricks said, through tears, "It was an accident when it happened. I love all of my grandkids. I took those kids. Their mama and daddy didn't want them." Her son, Frederick Lane, Crystal's uncle, told the court his mother was a wonderful mom and grandmother, and this was out of character. Church members expressed shock, insisting Ricks had given the children a happy home and was a devoted caregiver. They could not reconcile the woman they knew with the one who had beaten a child to death. The judge was unmoved. Ricks was sentenced to life without parole, a mandatory sentence for first-degree murder in North Carolina. She remained emotional, her tears mixing with the reality that she would spend the rest of her life behind bars. Detective Sergeant Kevin Bissett, who worked the case, told reporters the sentencing had been emotional for all involved. School teachers who had known Crystal attended, bearing witness to the conclusion of a case that had haunted them since that February afternoon in 2023. Today, Patricia Ricks serves her life sentence, while the 4 surviving grandchildren live elsewhere, removed from the home where their sister died. The case raises questions with no satisfying answers. How does a woman described by everyone as loving reach the point of killing a child? How do warning signs go unheeded despite teachers and social workers documenting them? How many other children remain in situations where the stress of caregiving, absence of support, and failures of oversight create conditions ripe for violence? Crystal Lane was 8 when she died at the hands of the person legally responsible for keeping her safe, a grandmother who took her in when no one else would but could not control the rage that ultimately killed her. Joyce Garrard. There exists a line between discipline and destruction, a boundary separating correction from cruelty. Most parents and grandparents understand this instinctively. They know when a child has had enough, when a consequence turns from lesson into punishment. Crossing that line can be fatal. For Joyce Garrard, that line was crossed in a dusty Alabama yard, where her 9-year-old granddaughter ran in circles for 3 hours until her small body could no longer continue, collapsing into seizures that ended her life 3 days later while Garrard watched. The 17th of February 2012 began as an ordinary Friday at Carlisle Elementary School in Etowah County, Alabama. 9-year-old Savannah Hardin was an excellent student with a constant smile. Despite parental custody battles and chronic medical issues, she brightened her teachers' days. That afternoon, riding the school bus home, Savannah took candy that did not belong to her and lied when confronted. By the time she stepped off the bus and faced her grandmother, 46-year-old Joyce Garrard, the stage was set for a case prosecutors would later call unprecedented, a murder in which the victim helped orchestrate her own death. School bus surveillance captured Garrard saying she would run the girl and teach her a lesson. Around 4 in the afternoon, Savannah was forced to run for nearly 3 hours, picking up sticks and circling the yard without pause. Garrard, who had previously told the bus driver that Savannah had a bladder condition and should avoid sweets, refused to let the child stop even as she vomited. Neighbors, unaware of the coercion, saw her running but could not comprehend how it could be lethal. Savannah begged for the punishment to end. She pleaded with Garrard to stop. The grandmother refused. Savannah's body eventually reached its breaking point. At 6:45 p.m., Savannah's stepmother, Jessica May Hardin, called, reporting seizures and unresponsiveness. Emergency responders rushed her to Children's Hospital, but it was too late. Savannah died on the 20th of February 2012 from dehydration and critically low sodium levels. The running had killed her. Joyce Garrard was arrested and charged with capital murder. Jessica was charged with felony murder for failing to intervene, though prosecutors later acknowledged she had been intimidated and too frightened to act. Garrard's story changed multiple times during the investigation. She initially admitted forcing Savannah to run over the candy, but later claimed Savannah had wanted to train for school races and they were running together when the child collapsed. Garrard denied intending harm. The jury did not believe her. In March 2015, Joyce Garrard was convicted of capital murder. Prosecutors sought the death penalty, emphasizing that Garrard had forced Savannah to help kill herself. The defense asked for mercy, invoking Savannah's love for her grandmother. Attorney Danny Bone even held a small dark rock, invoking the ancient practice of execution by stoning, telling the jury they had the right to refuse that stone. The jury voted 7-5 in favor of life in prison, rejecting the death penalty. Garrard's 50th birthday fell on the day of sentencing, the 26th of March 2015, allowing deputies to let her embrace her husband Johnny before proceedings. She held him while relatives wept, then stared at her son Robert, Savannah's father, who sat behind the prosecution table without returning her gaze. On the 11th of May 2015, Judge Billy Ogletree sentenced Joyce Garrard to life without parole. Relatives cried. Garrard remained expressionless as deputies led her back to jail. She would not serve long. Less than a year into her sentence, in February 2016, Garrard collapsed at Julia Tutwiler Prison for Women after a family visit. Airlifted to a hospital and placed on life support, she died 5 days later at age 50, believed to have suffered a heart attack. She maintained her innocence until the end. Savannah's stepmother, Jessica, pleaded guilty to aggravated child abuse as part of a negotiated deal and was released without additional custody time, prosecutors acknowledging she had been too intimidated by Garrard to intervene. The case of Joyce Garrard remains the only known murder where a grandmother forced a child to literally run herself to death. It is a stark reminder that those entrusted with raising children must understand the difference between discipline and devastation, and that love, even when claimed by those who commit violence, means nothing without the wisdom to stop. Becky Vreeland. Grandparents are supposed to be sanctuaries. They're the ones who spoil with extra cookies, who defend their grandchildren fiercely, who would walk through fire before allowing harm to come to those tiny lives entrusted to their care. Society holds this image sacred because it represents something fundamental about family and protection. But strip away that comforting assumption, and you're left with a question that haunts. What happens when the sanctuary becomes the crime scene? When the protector becomes the threat? When a grandmother's hands, meant to comfort, instead deliver violence? The answers to those questions came in the most devastating form on June 21st, 2022, when Riley Lynn Nolan's small body was discovered in a recycling bin behind a house in southwest Oklahoma City. The 3-year-old had been there for 3 days, covered with 2 blankets, one decorated with characters from Frozen while life went on around her. The person responsible for watching over Riley wasn't a stranger. It wasn't an intruder. It was the 61-year-old woman Riley called grandmother. It was Becky Vreeland. Riley and her siblings had been placed in Vreeland's care while their parents served time in jail on child neglect charges, an arrangement meant to keep the children safe within the family. Vreeland had been tasked with protecting these vulnerable children during their parents' absence. Instead, according to investigators, she turned her home into a place of terror. The little girl's body showed trauma so severe that medical examiners would later determine she died from blunt force injuries to the head. Blood evidence told the story that Vreeland's explanations tried to hide. When investigators processed the scene, they found blood throughout the house in the master bedroom, the master bathroom, utility rooms. 28 separate swabs were collected, many testing positive for Riley's DNA. In the master bathroom, police discovered 2 small circular indentations in the wall. Detective testimony would describe these marks as appearing to be the size of a child's head. Vreeland's account of events kept shifting, but her central claim never wavered. Riley's death was an accident. She insisted the toddler had climbed a 5 to 6 foot pool ladder next to the recycling bin to retrieve toys, fallen inside, and somehow asphyxiated. She claimed she discovered Riley's body on the morning of June 18, 2022, when she found the little girl's feet sticking out from beneath the toys in the bin. According to her statement to police, she felt Riley's feet and knew immediately that her granddaughter was gone. But instead of calling for help, instead of alerting authorities, Vreeland made a choice that would define her guilt. She left Riley's body exactly where it was. Her reasoning, she told investigators, was heartbreaking in its selfishness. She didn't want to tell her son about Riley's death until he was released from jail. She wanted him to have Father's Day with his other children first. For 3 days, Riley remained in that bin, while Vreeland went about her routines. Riley's siblings, also living in the house, later told police they had seen their sister that Saturday morning. One sibling described opening Riley's eyes when she wouldn't wake up and noticing a purple bruise on her forehead. They had been told Riley was sleeping in the shower because she had wet the bed. The lie was elaborate, but it couldn't hold. When Riley's grandfather, Vreeland's ex-husband, arrived at the house to celebrate her son's release from jail, Vreeland finally confessed there had been an accident. The grandfather immediately called 911. Investigators quickly determined that Vreeland's ladder story was physically impossible. The ladder had no base and would collapse if anyone attempted to use it. The blood evidence throughout the home contradicted any accidental fall scenario. Perhaps most damning, Vreeland herself had admitted to using what she called a whooping stick, a wooden bed frame leg, to discipline her grandchildren, and acknowledged leaving bruises on them in the past. The case moved through the legal system, with Vreeland maintaining her innocence even as the evidence mounted against her. In October 2024, she entered a no-contest plea to 1 count of first-degree murder, accepting punishment without admitting guilt. Cleveland County District Court Judge Lynn McGuire sentenced her to life in prison. Under Oklahoma law, that translates to 45 years, and Vreeland must serve 85% before becoming eligible for parole. She will be 99 years old before she can even be considered for release. As of today, Becky Ann Vreeland remains incarcerated in an Oklahoma State correctional facility. Riley's father and siblings are left to carry the weight of a loss that should never have happened. A little girl whose grandmother, the person meant to keep her safe, became the very thing she needed protection from. Velma Barfield. Some poisons strike quickly, leaving no doubt. Others creep slowly, masquerading as illness, a stomach bug, food poisoning. Victims feel unwell, but trust they'll recover, accepting soup and sympathy from the very person killing them. This was the method of the patient predator, someone who knows that death administered gradually looks like misfortune. Someone who understood that if enough people die the same way, patterns become invisible. In rural North Carolina, one woman perfected this art with rat poison, forged checks, and a grandmother's gentle smile. Margie Velma Barfield was born the 29th of October, 1932, in South Carolina. She grew up in poverty with an abusive father and a passive mother. At 17, she married Thomas Burke, escaping her childhood. They had 2 children and financial struggles, but stability. That changed in 1965 when Thomas suffered a car accident causing persistent headaches. He turned to alcohol. Velma developed a prescription pill addiction after a hysterectomy and back problems. Their marriage became a war zone. On the 4th of April 1969, their house caught fire while Velma and the children were out. Thomas, passed out from drinking, died inside. Authorities ruled it accidental. Velma collected the insurance. Less than 2 years later, she married widower Jennings Barfield, who died in March 1971 from heart complications. No autopsy was performed. By 1974, Velma's mother, Lillian Bullard, suffered severe stomach pains, vomiting, and diarrhea. She recovered temporarily, but on the 30th of December 1974, she died hours after being rushed to the hospital. Doctors were baffled. Velma publicly grieved and moved on. By 1976, she worked as a caregiver for the elderly, a role that suited her nurturing persona. Her first patients were Montgomery and Dolly Edwards in Lumberton. Montgomery died. Dolly followed on March 1, showing the same gastrointestinal symptoms as Lillian. The next year, Velma cared for Record Lee and her husband John Henry. On the 4th of June 1977, 80-year-old John Henry Lee died after excruciating stomach and chest pains, vomiting, and diarrhea. Diagnosis: gastroenteritis. Reality: arsenic. By 1977, Velma had entered a relationship with Stuart Taylor, a widower and tobacco farmer. She began forging checks from his account to feed her drug addiction. Fearing he'd discovered the theft, she poisoned him with arsenic-based rat poison in his beer and tea, then nursed him through the illness. On the 3rd of February 1978, Stuart Taylor died. Taylor's case differed. He wasn't elderly or frail. His daughter grew suspicious and requested further tests during the autopsy. Arsenic was discovered. Investigators focused on Velma, who confessed not only to poisoning Taylor but also John Henry Lee, Dolly Edwards, and her own mother. She claimed she never intended to kill anyone. The poison was meant to make them sick, to cover her theft and addiction. Investigators and the jury did not believe her. Velma's trial was swift. She was found guilty and sentenced to death in 1978. For 6 years, her attorneys filed appeals, arguing her severe drug addiction impaired judgment. They sought to reduce her sentence to life, but all appeals were denied. While on death row, Velma became deeply religious, participating in prison ministry work praised by evangelist Billy Graham. Some advocated for clemency due to her religious conversion, but North Carolina's governor refused. On the 2nd of November 1984, wearing pink pajamas and having eaten a final meal of cheese doodles and Coca-Cola, 52-year-old Velma Barfield became the first woman executed in the U.S. since 1962, and the first woman ever to die by lethal injection. Her final words were simple: "I want to say that I am sorry for all the hurt that I have caused." Velma Barfield's case remains a study in how trust can be weaponized, and how the persona of a caregiver can provide perfect cover for someone who kills quietly, repeatedly, and without remorse. Betty Neumar. Marriage is supposed to be forever, bounded only by the phrase, "till death do us part." For most people, that endpoint arrives naturally, decades down the road, after years of shared memories and accumulated history. But what happens when death arrives with suspicious regularity? When one person walks down the aisle 5 separate times, and each time, the other half of that union ends up dead? At what point does tragedy become a pattern, and a pattern become evidence of something far darker? Betty Neumar understood something fundamental about human nature. People don't want to believe that a tiny, white-haired grandmother who operates beauty shops and raises money for charity could be capable of arranging murder. They want to believe in her chicken casseroles and church attendance. They want to trust the woman who cuts their hair and asks about their families. And for decades, that's exactly what people did until investigators in North Carolina began pulling at a thread that would unravel a trail of bodies stretching across 5 states and nearly 40 years. Betty LaFon Johnson was born in November of 1931 in Ironton, Ohio, a coal mining town along the West Virginia border. She graduated from high school in 1949 and married Clarence Malone in November of 1950. She was 18, he was 19, and she told friends she wanted to escape her small town for something better. Their son, Gary, was born in March of 1952. The marriage dissolved, though the exact timing remains unclear. In November of 1970, Malone was shot once in the back of the head outside his auto shop in a small town southwest of Cleveland. Police found no signs of robbery. The case went cold. Betty, divorced from him for 18 years, was never considered a suspect. Her second husband was James A. Flynn, though it's unclear when she met or married him. She claimed he had frozen to death in a truck in New York City, but she allegedly told others he was shot to death on a pier. Investigators have been able to confirm little about Flynn's life or death. Gary was adopted by Flynn, and together Betty and James had a daughter named Peggy. By the early 1960s, Betty was living in Jacksonville, Florida, where she enrolled in beauty college. She met her third husband, Richard Sills, who was serving in the Navy. On April 18, 1967, police found his body in the bedroom of the couple's mobile home in Big Coppitt Key, Florida. Betty told police they were alone and arguing when he pulled out a gun and shot himself. After Betty was charged decades later in North Carolina, the Monroe County Sheriff's Department took another look at the death and uncovered Navy medical examiner documents revealing Richard Sills may have been shot twice, not once, as Betty told police. One bullet pierced his heart, while a second may have sliced his liver. No autopsy had been performed. Around 1968, Betty married Thomas Harold Gentry, a retired soldier living in Norwood, North Carolina. Just before his death, he confided in his brother, Al Gentry, "Never trust that woman. She isn't who she says she is." On July 13th, 1986, Harold Gentry was found dead in the couple's home, shot multiple times. Betty collected the insurance money and disappeared. Al Gentry spent 25 years pressing authorities to reopen the investigation. In 1991, Betty married John Neumar. At the time of their marriage, John was worth more than $300,000. But the couple filed for bankruptcy in 2000, with over $200,000 in debt spread across 43 credit cards. John died in October of 2007, at age 79 from sepsis, ischemic colitis, and ileus symptoms that could point to arsenic poisoning. His children claimed Betty never notified them of their father's death, which they only learned about after finding his obituary in the newspaper. They were shocked to learn she had already cremated him, despite his having purchased a burial plot. Tests on his ashes showed heavy metals, but no quantity could be determined, rendering the results inconclusive. In May of 2008, Betty Neumar was arrested and charged with hiring a hitman to kill Harold Gentry. The indictment alleged she tried 3 times to hire someone to kill him in the 6 weeks before his body was found. She was released after posting $300,000 bail and professed her innocence in a 2009 BBC documentary titled Black Widow Granny. On June 13, 2011, Betty Neumar died from cancer in a Louisiana hospital before her trial could begin. She was 79 years old. Al Gentry said simply, "She took all those secrets to the grave." Harold's murder remains an open case. No investigations have been reopened into the deaths of her other husbands. The questions that surrounded Betty Neumar in life followed her into death, leaving behind families who would never receive answers, and a legal system that never got the chance to determine whether a sweet-faced grandmother with a trail of dead husbands was truly guilty or simply the unluckiest woman who ever lived. Linda Carty. The desire for a child can drive people to extraordinary lengths: adoption agencies, fertility treatments, surrogacy arrangements that cross international borders. These are the legitimate pathways, built on paperwork and patience and profound longing. But desperation has a way of warping judgment, of transforming want into something darker. What begins as a wish can mutate into obsession, and obsession can convince someone that the ends justify any means, that the child they crave belongs to them by virtue of their wanting it more than anyone else. That possession matters more than how it's obtained. In Houston, Texas, in the spring of 2001, that kind of warped logic would culminate in a crime so disturbing that it would put a British grandmother on Texas death row for more than 2 decades and counting. Linda Carty was born on the Caribbean island of St. Kitts in 1958, when it was still a British territory, granting her British citizenship. She moved to the United States in 1982 to study pharmacology in Houston, where she eventually became a school teacher. But her life took a darker turn in the early 1990s. In 1992, she was convicted of auto theft and impersonating an FBI agent. Facing 10 years of probation, she struck a deal. She would work as a drug informant for the Drug Enforcement Administration. That arrangement ended when she herself was later arrested on drug charges. By 2001, Carty was living with her common-law husband, Jose Corona, in an apartment complex in Houston. Their relationship was deteriorating. Corona would later testify that he had left her shortly before the incident, and that she had become fixated on having another baby as a way to save their failing union. In the days leading up to May 16, 2001, Carty told Corona, her neighbors, and others that she was pregnant and expecting a baby boy the very next day. Yet witnesses noted she didn't appear to be pregnant. One neighbor claimed to have seen Carty sitting in a Pontiac Sunfire with a baby seat already installed in the back. Living in the same apartment complex was 25-year-old Joanna Rodriguez, who had given birth to her son, Ray, just 4 days earlier. On the night of May 16th, 3 men, Gerald Anderson, Chris Robinson, and Carlos Williams, forced their way into Rodriguez's apartment. Her husband, Raimundo Cabrera, who was in bed with his wife and newborn son, was beaten and tied up. Joanna and her infant were taken. According to testimony, Carty had brought medical scrubs and scissors. Apparently unaware that the baby had already been born, and believing she would need to cut the child from the mother's womb. Rodriguez was found bound, gagged, and suffocated in the trunk of a car registered to Carty. Baby Ray was discovered alive and unharmed in a black Chevrolet Cavalier that had been leased in Carty's daughter's name. Both vehicles bore Carty's fingerprints. The case against Carty was built on witness statements, phone records, and physical evidence linking her to both cars. Prosecutors argued that the former school teacher and DEA informant had masterminded the plot, directing the 3 men to storm the apartment, steal $1,000, and kidnap mother and child at gunpoint. The goal, they claimed, was for Carty to pass off Rodriguez's newborn as her own to win back Corona. Chris Robinson was the only witness to testify that he had seen Carty at the scene of the crime. On February 19, 2002, a jury found Linda Carty guilty. 2 days later, she was given a death sentence. Her 3 co-defendants received lengthy prison terms, but avoided capital punishment after testifying against her. Since her conviction, Carty has maintained her innocence. She insists she was framed by the 3 men as retaliation for her work as a drug informant. In 2014, affidavits emerged from key witnesses claiming that prosecutors Connie Spence and Craig Goodhart had threatened, intimidated, and coerced their testimony. Robinson stated in his affidavit that prosecutors told him he would receive the death penalty himself if Carty did not. Former DEA agent Charles Mathis, who had worked with Carty, claimed prosecutors prevented him from testifying about her character and threatened him with allegations of a fabricated affair. Carty's defense was handled by Jerry Guérinot, a lawyer who never won a single death penalty case in his career. A federal appeals court later ruled that some of his work was objectively unreasonable, though it concluded the deficiencies wouldn't have changed the outcome. British consular officials were not notified of Carty's arrest until after her conviction and sentencing, a violation of international treaty obligations. The British government, human rights organizations, and legal experts have all filed briefs supporting her appeals. Multiple appeals to the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, and twice to the United States Supreme Court have all been denied. Texas courts have refused to grant her a new trial despite the allegations of prosecutorial misconduct. As of today, 66-year-old Linda Carty remains on death row at the Mountain View Unit in Gatesville, Texas. She is the only British woman currently facing execution in the Western world. No execution date has been set. Whether she is a woman wrongfully convicted by a system that failed her, or a grandmother who orchestrated an unthinkable crime, remains a question that divides those who examine her case. What is certain is that Joanna Rodriguez is dead. Her son grew up without a mother, and Linda Carty continues to insist, from behind bars, that she is not the person responsible.